The Animal Crossing series means quite a lot to me. Like, a lot. My first introduction to the series was New Leaf, all the way back when it first released in 2013. I would have been about 9 at the time, give or take, and at that point, most of my video game experience was with Mario games and Lego games, so the concept of a game where there's no major goal, no enemies, no trip from point A to point B, it was a very new concept to me. I had no idea such a thing could exist, and it was mind-blowing. I instantly fell in love with the game, and to this day it remains one of my favorites of all time. I later tried out some of the other games in the series, and I was in love with those too, but I never really got around to the first Animal Crossing until around last year. And when I did play it, I didn't really get into it as deep as I did with New Leaf and Wild World. I probably should have given it more of a chance. Part of the reason I dropped it so fast was because my copy was bugged or something, and the shop was only selling the shovel and wouldn't swap it out for any other tools, so I couldn't really play the game. But I remember still enjoying the parts of the game I did have access to, just not enough to keep me coming back consistently. But recently I decided to try again. I'm gonna pick this game back up and give it another shot. Sorry about the extended backstory. Now it's finally time. Let's check out Animal Crossing and see what it's like. The first thing that happens upon booting the game is KK Slider here giving you some words of wisdom from the void. After that, though, you're taken to a first-person view of a train car. You're greeted by Rover, who begins to ask a bunch of questions such as what your name is and what time it is. Which isn't just Rover being nosy, it's this game's way of setting up your file. And this is a great example of one of the things I think makes this series special. Everything is designed to feel like an event. The simplest of things are always turned into fun little experiences. Does that make sense? Like this scene here. You choose your character's name and gender and get to name your town as well. But instead of it being a simple menu like in any other game, it's implemented into the conversation with Rover, which is something I haven't seen a lot of other games do, and it really makes this feel unique. During this conversation, you'll also answer some seemingly meaningless questions that actually determine which face your villager will have, out of 8 presets, 4 male faces and 4 female faces. There's no indication the questions are going to contribute to something though, and you can't change your face later. Usually I'd be against this. I've never been a huge fan of this kind of cryptic game design, especially not when it's implemented in a way that you can easily get locked into something you don't want. But the character customization in this game is already pretty bare bones anyway, so I don't think it's that huge of a deal. When you step off the train, you're greeted by Tom Nook, who offers you a house in exchange for temporarily working for him. You get to choose between these 4 identical houses, the only difference being the roof color. Now, me personally, I always go for the red roof, but you're allowed to choose a different color. I'll judge you for it, but you can still do it. Just don't pretend you're as cool as all of us red roofists. After that comes the part-time job segment, which I always hear people talk negatively about, but I was never that bothered by it. Nook has you complete a few errands for him, like planting flowers around town, delivering packages, and just meeting everyone in town. It's a bit tedious if you're already familiar with the game, but it serves the important purpose of subtly forcing the player to get accustomed to the town and its residents. And once you're done with his tasks, that's it. You're free to go do anything you want. From this point forward, there's no true goal, just live. Most of the game's main features are already unlocked at this point, so what you do next is truly up to you. There are of course goals you can set for yourself, such as upgrading your house, which you can do by receiving and paying off loans from Tom Nook. This gives the player more space for furniture and all that. Your house's interior is the most customizable part of this game. You can get furniture mostly by buying it from Tom's store, Nook's Cranny. However, you can also get furniture from other sources, like talking to your neighbors. There's even furniture you can store items in, but each one can only hold 3 items at a time. I guess the idea is that having a bigger house means you can own more stuff, but come on. To upgrade your house and buy furniture, you're gonna need money though, or bells, as it's called in this game. Your main source of income in this game is gonna be selling things to Nook. You can sell anything to him as long as it's not trash, but the best things to sell are bugs, fish, and fossils, which leads us into another major aspect of this game. So at Nook's Cranny, alongside furniture and clothes, you can also buy a few tools. These include the net, the shovel, the fishing rod, and the axe. The fishing rod can be used to catch fish, obviously. Catching fish in Animal Crossing is one of the more pleasant fishing experiences one can have in a video game. It's not as difficult to master as it is in, say, Stardew Valley, but it's not as simple as in a game like Minecraft. In this game, you just have to line yourself up so the lure lands directly in the fish's line of sight. Although in my experience, grabbing the fish's attention in this game is a bit more broken than in later entries. Sometimes I'll completely miss and still get the fish to notice. Once the fish is eyeing up your lure, you just have to wait until it pulls it down, and at that moment you have to hold the A button to reel it in, which is the part that takes some practice. I can never get the timing right in this game. My instincts are like fine-tuned to New Leaf. The net can be used to catch bugs, which are usually just hanging around. They require more precision than aiming a fishing rod since you have to try and get the net around the bug, but it's not as difficult as it sounds. It's pretty forgiving. As long as you get the bug in the general area of the net's inside, you'll catch it no problem. And finally, there's the shovel. All around town, you'll find these little marked spots in the ground where you can dig things up. You'll most commonly dig up either gyroids, which are little furniture things, but they have faces and screams. Or you'll dig up an unknown fossil. Fossils, alongside bugs and fish, can be sold to Nook and are a decent way to make some funds, but alternatively you can donate them to the local museum. The museum is run by Blathers the Owl, whose entire purpose in life is to stand in this empty room and wait patiently for you to give him things. He'll take bugs and fish right off your hands and have them displayed in their respective exhibit rooms. Fossils, on the other hand, require a few extra steps. Blathers isn't officially certified to identify fossils, so you'll have to mail the unknown ones to another museum out of town. Then when they're sent back to you, they'll be identified and able to be donated. Just a quick side note, when you're giving things to Blathers in this game, you have to give them to him one at a time, with several text boxes in between each. It gets old real quick, and you have to sell things to Tom Nook the same way. Anyways, aside from bugs, fish, and fossils, there's also a fourth type of donation you can make: art. These ones are trickier to obtain. A decent portion of them can be bought from Nook's Cranny, but some of them can only be purchased from Crazy Reds. Red is a fox who shows up in your town every once in a while. You'll know he's coming because he'll send you this oddly threatening letter. Crazy Red's coming! Crazy Red here. I'm just writing to let you know that I'm crazy! And I'll be in your neighborhood on May 6th at 6 p.m. His place is one of the only places to buy paintings, but he's also a cheap bitch who'll sell you fakes. You won't know if it's fake or not until after you've bought it, but unfortunately it's a gamble you'll have to make if you want to complete the set. Going back to the topic of Nook's Cranny, it's not the only interesting spot to go to in town. There's also the Able Sisters shop. In future entries, they're the primary source of clothing, but here they're just a place to make custom clothes and not much else. I never use them all that much here, honestly. In this game, changing your clothes means changing the pattern on your shirt and hat and nothing else. And you can't even mix and match the patterns or anything, it's very limiting. And for that reason, I wasn't all that into the custom designs or clothing in general, really. Once I found a pattern I liked, I was like, alright, cool, don't need to change that again. The post office is exactly what it sounds like. It's where you go to send mail or store mail. You can send letters to any villager in town and they'll send one back. The post office is also where you can go to use e-reader cards. For those unaware, this was basically the precursor to amiibo cards. You'd plug this bulky card reader into your Game Boy Advance and plug that into the GameCube. Then you could scan Animal Crossing themed cards to get things like free furniture and custom designs. Or if you were real lucky, you'd have one of the 2 NES game cards. This game had a feature where you could get several NES consoles as furniture items, and each one contained a fully playable NES game. Most of them could be obtained through normal means, but there were 2 that you could only unlock through the use of e-reader cards: Ice Climber and Mario Bros. Oddly enough, Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda are notably absent from the list of games. They're in the game's files though, which implies they were intended to be available at some point. I guess I shouldn't be too disappointed, I already own several copies of both games, but the idea of playing them in such an unconventional way is really cool to me. Okay, anyways, back to the actual topic. The wishing well is where most holidays are celebrated, but it also can tell you what to do to make your town look nicer, like where to find weeds. Weeds just pop up in your town on their own, and the longer you go without playing the game, the more weeds you'll see, so you kind of have to log in a lot in order to take care of them. Anyways, the first time I asked the well what to do, it told me there was a dark disturbance at an acre, instead of just telling me to go pick weeds, which made it sound a lot more ominous than it actually was, so I was kind of disappointed when I got there and didn't find anything but weeds. The train station mainly serves the purpose of traveling to other towns. If you plugged another memory card with Animal Crossing save data into your console, you could use the train station to travel to that town. Unfortunately, I can't really test this out because I don't have any other towns to visit, but I do think it's really neat that they implemented this. What I don't think is neat is the fact that the final store upgrade is locked behind this feature. That is incredibly stupid. There's also the dump, which is literally just a little fenced-off piece of land that you can drop trash or unwanted items into. You can also find other people's discarded items in it and take them for yourself if you really want to. Another method of taking people's things is the police station, which houses a lost and found. As far as I'm aware, there's no penalty for just taking shit that's not yours, so it's basically just the free stuff store. You can also talk to the dude outside and he'll give you a heads up if something interesting is happening in town, which is actually quite useful. I talk to him quite a bit. The final major location to talk about is Animal Island. So the town has a dock, and at it you'll meet Cap'n, who can take you in his boat to a remote tropical island. He'll only appear if you have a Game Boy Advance plugged into the console though. Here you'll find a bungalow, a villager who lives there, and some exclusive bugs and fish. But the real draw of the island to me personally is the GBA support. You can use it here to play with this little 16-bit version of the island. All you can really do is slightly interact with the villager who lives there by making them do simple tasks like fishing and stuff. But I really love this feature. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's not meant to be. Just a neat little bonus for people who happen to have a GBA and a link cable lying around. And that's pretty much all of the major locations around town. I think there's a nice variety of them here, but I do totally see why not all of them made it to future games. Some of these places serve like one function, and it does make sense from a design standpoint that they'd want to downsize, but I did like having more places on the map to check out. And speaking of the map, this thing feels huge! Towns in this game are made up of 30 randomly generated acres. It uses a grid-based format, kind of like a 2D Zelda game. You've got a top-down view with a camera that follows you around within each square of the grid. And also, just like Zelda, once you pass over a barrier, the camera slides over to show you the next square. This, combined with the sheer amount of acres, makes the town feel a lot bigger than it actually is. Even after many hours of playing, I still constantly got lost and have to pull out the town map, which is something that really shouldn't be happening in a game where you spend all your time in one location. And I think the acre format and the camera angle are the problem. The fact that the map is segmented like this makes the individual acres feel more disconnected to me, if that makes sense. It makes it harder to make like a mental image of where certain bits are. I know where all the buildings are, but they only take up a small portion of the space in an acre. The rest is just grass and trees. And some acres are nothing but grass and trees. It's easy to get lost when so much of the map looks the same and you keep getting caught on trees because you have no depth perception at this angle. Another prevalent issue I had with navigation is the cliffs and rivers. Each town has a cliff along the middle and a river that runs from the top of town down to the ocean. These both have preset spots to cross them, but I found myself very often getting to a grid where something I needed to do was realizing I was on the wrong side of the river, and then needing to walk around the river several acres until I got to a bridge, which is entirely an issue with the grid format. If I could smoothly walk around with no camera transitions, I'd probably have no issue memorizing the way to a bridge and the general layout of the river. This is all nitpicking though, obviously you get used to this with time. I just feel like it could have been handled a little bit better. Also, I do feel like I should mention that I did get kind of stuck with a weird layout. The reason a lot of my map is empty and looks the same is because for some reason over half my villagers live in the same general area. The only reason I didn't reset it was because one of my starting villagers was Bob, and Bob is the best villager, and no argument will change my mind on that. The villagers in this game are an aspect I often hear brought up when people discuss this game. Mainly I hear that they were more rude and that people miss that. In my time playing this game, I never saw that many examples of that. Most of my neighbors were relatively polite, and I played for quite a bit while making this video, so they had plenty of chances to be assholes to me. There was this part where one of my neighbors made me play a game with her, and at the end she gets to choose a random item from my inventory to trade for something from hers. But also you have the chance to back out of this, so it's really only a dick move the first time, and then after that you know it's coming. All villagers follow the same few set personalities, which is a constant throughout the series. That being said, the personality differences between villagers seemed more subtle than I thought they would, but at the same time they did feel more unique from each other than I would have expected. Like, I could go talk to Bob, and his mannerisms and word choice will be completely different than what I see when I talk to, say, Hank, which is much different than in New Horizons, where all of my villagers use the exact same language and speak in the same manner, to the point where none of them feel unique apart from their personality-specific traits, which are now much more prevalent in conversation. It feels like reading the same Mad Libs page, but with different words for each personality type. Sorry, excuse the rant. I'll try to save the rest of my thoughts on New Horizons for when I'm actually reviewing it, but you get the idea, right? The villagers in this game feel just a tad more alive than usual, and I really appreciate that. When you do interact with a villager, you'll have three options. You can ask them for a job to do, ask them to have a simple conversation, or leave. If you pick the first option, then there's a chance they'll give you a simple task to accomplish. And I do mean very simple. It's always, deliver a gift to this character, or bring me literally any fish. Like any fish, I don't care which one, just any of them. But it helps to establish the idea that your villagers are actually friends with each other and hang out when you're not in the game. They'll also have conversations with each other on their own, and can even hurt each other's feelings, which causes them to mope around and emit the most grating noise in the game. Back on the topic of jobs though, if you complete a task from one of them, they'll reward you with things. It's always some kind of random item you probably don't want or need, but it's the thought that counts, right? When I was a kid playing New Leaf, I was always afraid to get rid of gifts from other villagers because I felt bad. I have no such weakness now. Sorry dude, but this shirt you gave me is fucking ugly. If you choose the conversation option, then they'll talk to you about something random for a short while. A lot of these conversations are just random stuff, but sometimes they'll mention gameplay mechanics to nudge the player in the direction of stuff they might have missed. Another thing that can happen when you talk to a villager early on is them asking you your birthday. In later installments, the game will just ask you for your birthday during all the scripted stuff at the beginning, but here it happens somewhat randomly, and I kinda like that. Makes it seem more like they care about you specifically, and I think that's perfect for a game about living life and making friends. And if you play the game on your birthday after doing that, then the villager you're closest with will personally greet you and give you a gift. It's little stuff like that that makes this game so great. The game is chock full of these kinds of events to spice things up. Earlier I talked about how Red sets up his shop on random occurrences, but there's also several other occasional visitors you might encounter, the most obvious one being KK Slider. He'll sit just outside your train station on Saturdays and give you a personal performance if you ask for it. This is also where the game's credits are for some reason. I guess there was no other logical place to put them. There's also tons of holidays. A lot of them aren't super exciting. In most of them you just talk to the mayor at the well and he gives you an item. But then there's stuff like Halloween where you actually have unique stuff to do. But perhaps the most infamous event you can trigger in this game is Mr. Resetti. If you happen to close the game without saving, not only will you lose progress, but Mr. Resetti appears in front of your house and berates you for not saving. And the more you do it, the more pissed he gets, making you sit through tons of dialogue as punishment. This also ties perfectly into my whole thing earlier about turning simple concepts into entire mechanics. They could have easily just had a pop-up menu be like, hey man, you forgot to save, might want to do that. But no, instead a goddamn mole man sprouts out of your floor and screams at you for being a terrible person. Another thing that this game does really well is the presentation. Since it's basically just an N64 game running on a GameCube, there's a noticeable contrast between the N64's chunky models and low-quality textures, and the GameCube's high resolution and frame rate. The art style is very cartoonish and stylized, everything is brightly colored, very little lighting effects, and everything has unnatural proportions. buildings are way smaller on the outside than they are inside, and every character has a short body with a massive head. It all looks quite nice, and nothing looks out of place. But of course, the biggest thing in this game that's still relevant even today is the music. Animal Crossing games are known for having killer soundtracks, and this one is no exception. The title theme is such a good example of this. It's the first thing you hear upon booting up the game, and it sets the mood so well. It's this piano arrangement with a simple beat in the background. It's one of the most welcoming title themes I've heard in a game. I think that's a perfect word to describe it. Welcoming. It makes you feel comfortable, but at the same time has a hint of energy to it, which could really describe the game as a whole. The shop themes do a great job of fitting the atmosphere of their respective locations. The Nook's Cranny theme is iconic, and I like how as you upgrade the store, the theme changes to fit the scenery, but always keeps the Nook's Cranny motif. The only main area theme I don't like that much is the museum. I'm not sure how to describe it, it just doesn't feel right to me. I think a large part of the issue is this trumpet part in the background. It makes me think of the Temple of the Ocean King, and that is definitely not something you want to be associated with. I'm partially joking, but the song does invoke more of a dungeon vibe than it probably should. I'm assuming the reason it's such an empty song is because if you enter any of the 4 exhibits, different instruments are added to the song. But as cool of an idea as that is, I feel like it could have been executed a little better. The music you'll hear the most are the outdoors themes. The first time that you enter your town, you'll hear this song. Which is then followed by this while you work for Nook. And then, after you're let loose, neither song ever plays again. Which is a huge shame, they're both insanely good. Instead, from that point onwards, you'll hear one of 25 different tracks. There's one for each hour of the day, plus an extra song that plays instead if it's raining. Most of these are really good, like good enough to listen to them on their own outside of the game. But inside the game, they don't always fit the mood all that well, in my opinion. If you're at all familiar with the series' music, you'd probably expect the day music to be more upbeat, then slowly transition into more of a relaxed tone, right? This is what plays at 2 a.m. Yeah, what the hell? Almost all of the hourly themes are like this to an extent. They all feel at least a little bit bouncy. Even at the hours where nobody should be awake, the music is always fast-paced. I definitely wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but it sure is different. It's strange to play the game at like 4 a.m. and the tone of music is exactly the same as it was at 4 p.m. I do personally prefer how the later games handled it, but I have no problem with this. There is one song that's pretty calming, and that one is 5 p.m. 5 p.m. is exactly what that hour should sound like. A bit of a middle ground, a transition from a productive afternoon to a laid-back night. It's the sound of just getting home from work or school and being relieved that it's over for now. This song is perfect, and I think it's easily the best one in the game. It's just that as soon as you reach the next hour, the vibe is gone and it's back to business as usual. The music direction in this game is just a perfect example of what makes it feel so unique. It's so different to the others, yet so similar. I completely understand why many people still hold this game in such high regard. I had a really good time with this game. It's not perfect, obviously. It's a lot less refined than its successors, but it's really impressive to me how much they got right on their first try. In my Tomodachi Collection video, I talked about how that game is best enjoyed with a retrospective lens, how it's most easily enjoyed if you've played the sequel and are observing it as a weird, primitive relic, an earlier version of something that would eventually reach greatness. When I first bought Animal Crossing, I kind of expected to come out with a similar mentality. At that point I had played every other game, so I was afraid it would just feel like a watered-down, simpler version of the others. But that is absolutely not the case. The game is great both when viewed as its own thing and when viewed in comparison to its successors. It's just simpler, is all. This game is Animal Crossing in its most basic and simple form, but there's a beauty to its simplicity. I think the rougher edges and the smaller amount of things to do make it feel more focused in a way. And the fact that the Animal Crossing formula still works so well, even in its simplest form, is a true testament to how amazing the framework of this series is. That being said, it's in major need of some quality of life improvements. But even with that being the case, Animal Crossing is a wonderful game, and if you're at all interested in it, by all means do check it out. It's also one of the only good first-party GameCube games still going for a reasonable price, so it has that going for it. Anyways, that's about all I have to say on this game. I do intend to cover the entire Animal Crossing franchise, so if you liked this video, be sure to stay tuned for when I cover the next game in the series, Animal Crossing Wild World. I played it before a couple years ago, but I'm excited to look at it again with the knowledge of what it's built upon, and to see if it's a worthy successor or not. But until then, outro.